Welcome to today's episode of AlphaChat. We're diving into transformation in the investment management world, what's driving it, the challenges firms face, and how enterprise architecture is playing a critical role. My name's Stephen Huppert, and I'm joined today by Bryan Stephens, Head of Customer Transformation at AlphaCert and an expert in enterprise transformation and advisory services. Great to have you here, Bryan.
Thanks, Stephen, for having me. Looking forward to this.
So let's start with the big picture. What's really pushing investment management firms to transform right now?
Yeah, look, it's a mix of external and internal pressures. So externally, we're seeing tighter regulations, more competition, and investors are really expecting more personalized digital first type experiences. And internally, firms are trying to just do the standard reduce costs and streamline operations. That's kind of status quo. And the result is really an urgency to modernize systems and improve how data is managed and used. So that's what's really driving the transformation.
Yeah, I mean, those pressures of reducing costs and streamlining, getting that efficiency in the operations is something I'm hearing a lot of. However, it's never easy to, throw out your old tech and get some new tech, or even try to plug new tech into the old systems. So what's making the integration so tough and challenging for organizations?
Yeah, exactly, Stephen. Yeah, it's really plug and play. Legacy systems weren't built for things like AI or cloud platforms or blockchain or all that sort of new technology that we're seeing. So when you try and layer on these new capabilities, you run into compatibility issues. You get issues with, the way that operations work. You get increased operational risk and higher costs. So if the integration of these technologies isn't handled well, then you miss out on the value that those technologies are supposed to deliver.
And you mentioned AI there, Bryan. It's certainly the buzzword of the moment. And I think unlike blockchain, which we're still waiting to see the impact, I think AI is having a very immediate impact. And everybody I talk to is looking at how they can use AI both in the back office, but also in the front office. So that's really important. And the operational risk that you referred to is certainly a huge factor, especially here in Australia, with new regulation starting in about a month's time.
Mm.
That's going to put a really tight focus on operational resilience and operational risk management.
Yeah.
But you mentioned also the cost pressures.
Mm.
How does that impact the decisions around the technology?
Yeah, so it's a real balancing act for organizations. On one hand, they need to invest in that technology to stay competitive, but on the other hand, they're being pushed to reduce fees and improve margins. So every tech investment needs to be highly strategic and really focused on long-term value and not just a short-term fix.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much demand for limited funding.
Mm.
And when I speak to heads of investment operations, that's one of the big challenges, that they are expected to do more with less.
Yeah.
And also, being in the back office, it sometimes doesn't get the attention that it probably should have. So that's a really important one.
Mm.
And a key part of the evolution that I'm seeing in investment operations is around the data,
Mm.
how they use the data and how they manage their data. So there are huge amounts of challenges in that area. What are some of the common challenges that you see when you're talking to clients?
Yeah, it's pretty consistent, Stephen. Like the big ones are poor data quality, just real inconsistency, and then also siloed systems. We still have a lot of siloed data. The fact that we have more access to data means we're creating more silos. It's a challenge for everyone. And a lot of firms really lack the proper metadata tools and the data governance frameworks. And that makes it really hard for them to trust the data or use it effectively for decision making. So without that good foundation of good metadata and good data governance frameworks, then transformation's a real uphill battle for them.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the data governance there. It's something that I've been seeing a lot of and having some conversations with people who are in the data governance field, and they find it a real struggle to get the proper conversations at the high enough level around data governance.
Mm.
It's seen as a bit of a compliance as opposed to actually this can really become a very
Add
solid
value.
foundation.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that data governance is a critical foundation is important.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So the big buzzwords that we've heard for quite a few years now is, we're a data-driven organization.
Yeah.
Lots of people talking about it. I wonder if anybody really understands what that means in practice. And that's causing huge amounts of challenges in trying to become that ideal data-driven organization.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the challenges that you see people grappling with?
Yeah, with a data-driven organization, you can put those tools in place, but when you're talking about transformation, it's more than just the tools that you have. And I think one thing that a lot of organizations really fail to understand is that we're talking about an organizational shift. You know, you're bringing in new capabilities, and you really need to position the organization for those new capabilities. So we're talking about new skill sets, new processes. We're talking about changing culture sometimes, and that's
Mhm,
really hard
mhm.
to change. So changing how teams collaborate and how decisions are made. It's a huge opportunity, but you really need to take sort of careful approach to planning and supporting people as they go through that.
And I guess it comes back to the basics. Any operating model, any transformation, you've got to consider people, processes, and systems.
Mm,
And so often, what I'm seeing is a lot of focus on the systems, the technology, but as you point out, forgetting the people and forgetting the processes.
mm,
And I like the reference to the culture there and what it even means to be data driven. And I think we need more conversation about that. And that'll be really important. Organizations need to step back a bit and think, well, okay, I'm going to be data driven, but what will that even look like? How will I know if I'm data driven?
yeah, yeah, completely.
So, as we're thinking about the transformation, the term we used before was an enterprise transformation. So, that's far reaching across the whole organization. And it does disrupt, it can be quite disruptive for the whole enterprise, for the whole organization. So, what are some of the key ingredients in your experience of a successful transformation project?
Yeah, great question, Stephen. One I'm pretty passionate about, to be honest. I've worked in projects a long time and I've seen great projects, I've seen poor projects, and there's a range of factors. But look, key elements, I think, for me is you need really good governance in your project structure. And I guess I'm talking about the hierarchy and the different sort of way that decisions are escalated. So when an organization project gets stuck, it needs mechanisms to really be able to move forward and escalate the decision up to a higher authority to make that decision. So governance is key, and then also having a really well structured project team itself with clear deliverables, that's super important. But it's a common mistake as well in terms of organizations just really don't give enough clarity or have the right roles there. So yeah, the project team really needs to have a mix of business experts, and your typical project roles, project managers, business analysts, and the tech specialists, etc. I guess the other thing that I see commonly overlooked is like the project initiation document or some sort of scoping document or something that really sets that clarity. I guess people kind of feel like it's a bit of an administrative overhead to do that, but it really just sets the tone and it sets the direction, and it's super important. I really encourage people to make sure they do those project initiation documents or whatever sort of scoping document that you have at the start before you embark on the actual transformation.
Yeah, look, that's so important. And you're right. We've got a project and they just rush off at 100 miles an hour and wonder why they don't get to where they need to get to. So,
Mm,
it's interesting your reference to that project initiation document or project chart or whatever it might be up front. And, everyone can have their own name for it. But it really, as you were talking, it reminded me of the map that guides you. You don't just go off into the jungle and wonder where you're going.
yeah,
You do a survey, you'll get your map in place, you'll work out where you're going, what sort of equipment you need, and you could expand that metaphor into what type of people do you need along the way, depending on the terrain that you're going to be crossing,
I
to
completely,
make sure you've got a fit for purpose team. So, yeah, all of those elements are really important.
yeah.
Um,
It's a great metaphor. I like that, Stephen. I might steal that sometime.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Brian, you've been involved in several large complex transformations. I'm sure there's some very good ones there that you can think back on, but there's also ones I'm sure that in retrospect you could have done things better. Do you want to give me a couple of examples, maybe, of some of the complex transformations and, more importantly, the key learnings from that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my previous experience with projects has been around order management systems. So order management systems, pretty poorly named, to be honest. Nowadays, they're literally the operating system for the investment management business. Whereas I guess originally they were primarily focused on just managing the orders, but they reach right into all aspects of the front office and extend into the middle and back office activities as
Mm-hmm.
well. So order management systems is really one of the most complex and time consuming projects an investment management organization could undertake. And I think that really comes down to the fact that people often overlooked the effect it has on people's roles really thinking about the new processes that come in as part of it, the old processes that need to be decommissioned, and really what's the change in roles and responsibilities, and really how do we actually change people's job descriptions in some cases. So I think in my past experience, that's probably one of the learnings I've taken away from doing these projects several times, thinking about it more than just implementing a piece of software, but really looking at it from a bigger picture and understanding how we need to implement the change, including taking people on the journey, the organizational change aspect, I think is probably one of my key takeaways of the last couple of decades of doing these sorts of projects. It's really often a lacking piece in delivering these projects. So I really encourage people to pay more attention to that side of doing a project. Often you just want to get the piece of software in and get the processes working and that, but without doing that organizational change part, it can feel really disjointed, and it can be quite a challenge for people in the organization to really come on board on the journey.
Yeah, that's really consistent with what I've seen. I've also been involved with a lot of large software transformations, and I think a lot of people, especially on the business side or even on the technology side, think, okay, I pick up one box, put that aside, and put another box in place, and everything's fine, and they don't consider the actual ripple effects of that on the whole organization. And your comments about needing to reshape workflows, can we do things better, and even the redefining of roles, I think, is really important. So yes, we need that broader view. I mean, it reminds me, I'm old enough to remember getting rid of typewriters and putting in place a word processing machine. And, the first time that was done, the workflow stayed the same, people were doing it. But then we quickly realized that actually you could change the way you do things. You could design your business for the new technology rather than
Mm.
just using the new technology to do what you've always done. So I think that's a really good example that you bring out there.
It's so interesting how the technology changes, but the actual impact on an organization doesn't change.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, given all of that, what are some of the things that you've seen go wrong in these projects?
Yeah. Look, I think for me, communication is the big one.
Yeah.
People really have different interpretations of project scope, and what one person
Mm.
thinks is success, someone else doesn't agree with. And so you really need to have a way of keeping everyone on the same page. And that might be like, frequent briefings and regular updates to help make sure everyone's on the same page. Really clear documentation for all project members to follow because, again, these people are working on these projects day after day. And it's tricky when the scope is changing and the direction is changing. And yeah, you really want to make sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction. And things like architectural diagrams, visual representations of projects help clarify complex aspects and topics. And then defining the roles and responsibilities in terms of each project member's contribution, and that really helps with the decision making and avoids confusion and overlap. Communication is really a key thing when you're talking about enterprise transformation, and you really got to find that balance between too little and too much communication, because too little is going to lead to misunderstandings, while too much is going to overwhelm people. And yeah, there's really a bit of an art to that. It's not a one size fits all thing. It needs to be tailored for the organization, mainly to do with cultural aspects of the organization.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Having that right sized or fit for purpose communication plan is critical, isn't it? Otherwise,
Mm,
it just becomes another compliance thing. But understanding the organization, understanding what the organization needs, both within the project but also the broader organization, certainly would help improve the chances of success dramatically.
yeah.
So, what are some of the ways to keep all the different stakeholders aligned? Because in these big, complex enterprise transformation projects, you've got a broad range of stakeholders, some of them with skin in the game, some of them not. Some of them maybe not interested in the success of the project, or dare I say, even would undermine the success of the project. I mean, there's so many internal dynamics going on in these big organizations. So,
Mm.
how do we try and keep the stakeholders aligned?
Yeah, it's making sure everyone understands the current state and the future state. And I guess that comes back to the making sure things are well documented or decisions are clear, and that everyone has a shared understanding of the goals and the
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
context. So that's really key. And I think architecture helps a lot with that sort of
Okay.
current state to future state transition. Yeah, I think that's one of the tools that organizations can really use to help with effective communication.
And I like the way you refer to communicating the future state as well. And I guess that really comes back to the why of doing the project. And I think that helps everybody along the way. So understanding why they're doing it, what are the benefits of doing this project, I think are critical. You've referred a number of times as we've been talking today to change management.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about the role it plays and where we can see how we can actually improve delivery outcomes.
Yeah, so change management plays a significant role in enterprise transformation project. It is often an overlooked part of projects, but it serves as the interface between the project and the business at all levels, from the executive level down to the end users affected by the transformation. There's several critical activities that you need to think about with regards to change management. So I guess the obvious one is the role changes. If there's any role changes and role and responsibility changes, you've got to draft that stuff into people's position descriptions. And so that's going to require close collaboration with your organizational design and human resources team to make sure you get that right. And I guess another aspect of change management, which is probably the one most people think of, is actually the user training. So sometimes people think change management is just user training, but it's not.
Mhm.
Um, really, the point I mentioned before about the role changes, I think is the most significant thing. But yes, user training is important. So you got to provide that training on the new processes, the handover points between teams, and make sure everyone's understanding how processes are going to work in the new future state. And change management, another key function it serves is acting as a regular checkpoint or having regular checkpoint forums and running that and really engaging the end user community in terms of understanding where are they on their journey in this transformation effort, and are we heading in the right direction in terms of how they see things, and feeding that back to
Mm.
high level management. Yeah, so I mean, change management, it's super critical. I think I've come to appreciate it more and more as time has gone on in terms of how much of a role it plays in success of large enterprise transformation projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned success in transformation. How do we measure it? How do we
Yeah.
know if we actually achieve what we want to achieve?
Yeah. I guess the answer in the nutshell is, you need clear, measurable goals tied to business outcomes. And you do that through creating these smart type goals. So, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So, for example, maybe a goal is going to be to grow sales of product X in the Asia Pacific market by 10% in the next financial year. It really needs to be that concise. And that's really going to help people understand, okay, actually, through this initiative, what are we trying to achieve? And
Mhm.
more often than not, like, you don't actually see that metric part assigned to an initiative. It's like, do this piece of work, but you're not really told what is the outcome we're trying to achieve. And for the project managers, that's crucial. How do they know that their initiative has been successful unless you can give them some sort of benchmark that you're trying to target? So, measuring success in a project, it's different depending on who you are and what your perspective is, but definitely from the top level, there needs to be really clear guidance in terms of these sort of metrics that are assigned to projects. Because as I mentioned, everyone's got their own perspective in terms of project success. You might have an executive that considers a project a success if the sales growth targets are achieved.
Mm.
Meanwhile, the salespeople are affected by this implementation of a new CRM, and they basically seen increased workloads due to low-level processes being inefficient. So, they probably wouldn't consider it a success. So there's an element of perspective when it comes to measuring the success of a transformation project.
That focus on perspective and really appreciating that different people have different perspectives or different goals is critical. It
Yeah.
really reminds me of a story of three bricklayers who were engaged to rebuild St Paul's Cathedral after
Okay.
the Great Fire of 1966. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this story.
No.
The architect Christopher Wren was commissioned to
Yeah.
rebuild St Paul's Cathedral.
Hmm.
And one day he was wandering around the building site at the end of the 17th century and he saw the three bricklayers working hard, one crouched, one half standing, one standing tall, working very fast and very hard. And so he said to the first bricklayer, "What are you doing?" And the bricklayer replied, "I'm a bricklayer. I'm working hard laying bricks to feed my family." So then Christopher Wren went to the second bricklayer and asked the same question. "Oh, I'm a builder. I'm building a wall."
Okay.
And then he went over to the third bricklayer, who seemed to be the most productive of the three. And when he asked the question, "What are you doing?" that bricklayer said, "I'm a cathedral builder. I'm building a great cathedral to the Almighty." And
Right.
that really does highlight having clear objectives, but also appreciating that different people have different motivations and different outcomes they're looking for.
Yes. Yes, that's a great analogy. I like that one. Yeah.
And so you've mentioned enterprise architecture a couple of times.
Mm.
So let's focus in on that for a bit. How can that help when you're doing this large enterprise transformation?
Yeah, so enterprise architecture is a great tool. It provides a structured, holistic approach to integrating technology and modernizing systems. So it enables organizations to break down the silos within the organization. It's really focused at that high level of abstraction, and it can really pull together the different
Mhm.
silos within the organization. Because let's face it, you may sit on the same floor as someone else, but often you don't know what they do. So, enterprise architecture is really responsible for understanding all the parts of the organization and really coming up with a comprehensive plan in terms of how a transformation can occur, and particularly, I guess, from that technology angle. But then I guess when you think about business architecture, which is a part of enterprise architecture, or often thought of as a part of enterprise architecture, then that's really coming at it from a structured or strategic business planning type lens. So enterprise architecture, it's a blueprint for supporting methodical planning and implementation of change, and it helps investment management organizations maintain that operational stability while evolving to meet the future demands.
And that's also important, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting. I think we can all relate to that story of not really knowing what other people in the organization are really doing, and that can create all sorts of problems. So, yeah, it sounds like enterprise architecture is a really valuable framework we can put on top of what we're trying to achieve. And I imagine within that whole enterprise architecture kit bag, there's lots of different tools and frameworks that can be used. Are there some particular ones that you recommend?
Yeah, yeah. So look, I mean, most firms when they're starting out with enterprise architecture will just sort of use tools that they have available. This is Excel or PowerPoint or Confluence, and that's fine. But I think as you grow, and definitely if you've got a more complex environment, then a specialized EA tool makes a really big difference. And as for frameworks, I'd say, TOGAF being the most well known is one that everyone's heard of, but I'd caution against using it straight out of the box because enterprise architecture isn't a one size fits all type
Mm.
thing. You really need to tailor the way you do enterprise architecture to each organization, in terms of its understanding of enterprise architecture, its maturity levels, its culture, and what regulations it's affected by, a whole number of different things. Yeah.
Mm. So it sounds like that enterprise architecture is a great framework to use for helping you achieve success, but it's important to be adaptable. It's important to, I think, like we said before, be fit for purpose for your particular organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And there's also a concept I've come across of a fractional EA model. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so a fractional enterprise architect is basically when you get a highly experienced architecture professional engaged on a part-time basis. So like maybe it's 1 day a week or 1 week per month, or maybe it's just on a per initiative basis. That's got a lot of benefits. Like if you're a small
Mhm.
investment management organization and you don't need to or have the budget to employ a full-time enterprise architect, then you've got this option of a fractional enterprise architect.
Mm.
So there's no doubt you're going to benefit from having an
Mhm.
experienced architect engage with you. So yeah, look, it's a really cost-effective way to get great talent, but at a fraction of the full-time cost. And I mean, that's for the small investment managers, but even if you're a larger investment manager, a fractional architect can help move things forward, as it's pretty
Mhm.
common in the large organizations to have your full-time architects basically not able to extract themselves for long enough from the weeds to make any headway on big picture things like high level design or strategic
Yeah.
planning or governance type things. So real benefit for the large organizations too. And if I can add one more, Stephen, I'd say organizations that are thinking about merger and acquisitions, and we know that there's a fair amount of that's been going
Mhm.
on in the Australian market in terms of super fund space. Enterprise architects really help there, and in particular, business architects can really help because they can offer sort of capability assessments across the two businesses, and that helps you then determine, okay, which parts of the business is performing best from each organization, and which one might we keep, and really helps bring some data to those type of
Yep.
decisions.
Look, that's a really important example, Brian, and yeah, you're correct. There's a number of quite significant mergers happening in the Australian superannuation sector at the moment. One just being called off even
Yeah.
just in the last few days. And you're right, bringing that lens of enterprise architect to that merger can be very beneficial. So yes, the role of a fractional enterprise architect sounds like a really valuable one. So, as we're getting towards the end of our chat today, Brian, how does AlphaCert fit into all of this?
Yeah, so AlphaCert's advisory team, we support the end-to-end
Mm-hmm.
transformation. So that is enterprise architecture, we do business architecture, we do initiative planning for you or help with it. We also are quite commonly involved in data governance type initiatives, and we specialize in investment management. So we understand the types of systems that you have, the regulations that are in place, and the operational processes, and just the realities of trying to run an investment management business. And we've led major projects like order management system replacements and custodian migrations. And so we can really help organizations through those types of large scale enterprise transformations that they have.
And that experience and deep knowledge of investment management is critical. I've seen a number of large projects not be as successful as they could have. They got very good, very well qualified, experienced program and project management people, but they lack that domain knowledge. And I think
Yeah.
that it is really critical to have some deep domain knowledge when we're dealing with investment management, and especially data. So that's a really important point you've brought out there.
Exactly, Stephen. If I can just riff on that for a second, I
Yeah.
think particularly with the data, I think it takes a lot to bring someone up to speed on investment management
Mm.
concepts and particularly the data. And so, yeah, you do often see projects that try to do maybe like a warehouse implementation internally with business analysts, project managers who don't have that investment management experience can really drag on. And so
Mm.
that's where AlphaCert really exceeds. Investment management is our subject matter expertise, and we can really help you with any types of initiatives, particularly in that data space. And our broad range of skills can really help your organization achieve
Mm.
success.
And that broad range of skills should give a lot of confidence to an organization that they really are increasing their potential for success. That's great.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up, then, Brian, any final advice for investment management firms starting out on their enterprise transformation journey?
Yep. So super important. Start with a real
Mm.
clear vision. Focus on alignment of the people involved in the transformation effort. Don't underestimate the people side of change. And if you're in doubt, get experienced help. Using enterprise architecture, business architecture, and experienced people within investment management type transformation initiatives can really save you, years of rework and millions of dollars in costs.
And we've all seen that happen. So, look, Brian, that was really insightful. So, thanks for joining me today, and look forward to having further conversations.
Great. Thanks, Stephen.